All right, part one of finding joy in abstraction. We're going to talk about mark making. I have several other online classes where there is a mark making section. That is because mark making is an integral part of the art making experience. It is a way that you can learn and grow. It is a way for you to let loose and be free. It is also a way for you to find your style. And from marks, paintings can be born, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this class. Mark making is a great way to warm up as well, and to get your hand flowing with no sort of preconceived notion about what the finished project should be. The first thing to know, because we only have line, shape, color, and texture, the elements of art to tell our story, this makes line so important, because line is kind of the star of the show. It's how we're going to tell our story. And it's important to know that lines communicate information. So a horizontal line like this is restful. Okay, so if you are horizontal to the earth, you are resting. So if you want to make a piece of art that is nice and calm and encourages you to go to sleep, you're going to use horizontal lines, because that gives a feeling of rest. Vertical lines give a feeling of strength and power. They lead your eye up to the sky, so they lead your eye heavenward. So it's interesting how just a couple of line differences, direction of the lines, will give you a different feel, because again, these lines are communicating information to you. Now, a diagonal line or a curvy line introduces energy and motion, and will tell a very different story than these, because if you are diagonal to the earth, or if your body is in a curve, something's happening, something's going on. You're jumping, dancing, leaping, falling, flying through the air. So a diagonal and curvy lines, okay, are energy and motion. So let me write this here. These are restful lines. These are powerful. Their stability, like a building would be stable, okay? And they lead your eye up. And curvy and diagonal lines are energy, motion, okay? Something's happening. So the hardest kind of line to control is a curvy and a diagonal line. If you have too many curvy diagonal lines, it's hard to know where to look. If you have just a few or one placed in a certain, in a strategic spot, our eyes will follow it to where, to guide you to where you want people to look, because our eyes like to follow lines. It's just what we do. If we see two people looking at each other, what we want to do is we'll look at them and think, why are they looking at each other? And what we'll do is we will look from one person to the next person. That is called a sight line. Meaning that, our brains are hardwired to naturally do that, okay? And so line is powerful, and line is something that you need to know how to wield. And I want you to do a little bit of mark making practice. I want you to do 2 different sheets. Just use watercolor paper. You can gesso it or not gesso it. It's totally up to you. It doesn't matter which you do. I did gesso mine in advance, but gesso for this part is optional. So here's my gessoed watercolor paper. In your handout, I have given you a list of feelings, or a list of, I would say these are feelings. And I want you to try to make marks to portray those feelings. We have anger, fear, confusion, happiness, and love. The great thing about this exercise is there is no right or wrong. So your mark for anger might be opposite my mark for anger. It doesn't matter. What I do want to caution you against is making marks that are actually symbols. So a symbol is a heart, or a smiley face, or a teacup. Okay, those are symbols. A mark is what makes up a symbol. Okay, so I use a lot of circles, and so I'll put circles in my marks, and people will say, well, that's a symbol, and I think circles are okay for marks because they do exist in nature. Whereas this smiley face, this exact heart, I mean, we've assigned this shape meaning through our culture. So try to avoid making symbols if you can. All right, and we're going to do all of these feelings on the same piece of paper. And looks like there was some turquoise paint on the back of my handout, so I've got a little turquoise to start with. Awesome. All right, anger. So for me, anger is heavy and so I'm just using the Stabilo all pencil. I pre-sharpened a bunch of them because I know through experience that I tend to go through them pretty quickly and they need to be sharpened constantly, so I pre-sharpened. So there's anger. Now, how would fear differ? So in my mind, fear might be tentative and small. When you're afraid, that's kind of how you feel, right? So that is my fear. Confusion. Don't do question marks, my friends. I would think confusion is kind of all over. Dense and lots of lines going different directions. Happiness. I think happiness is circles, because I think circles can be people or they could be feelings, and they're inclusive and they're round, so they have soft edges. Okay, so that's my happiness. And love. Love, love, love. I think love is all inclusive, so I'm going to make love a nice big mark that touches a bit of everything. Okay, so look at your piece from different directions as well. I'll show you later how we can use this as a composition tool, but were you able to tell your story by changing the style of mark? And if you feel like the answer is no, then you just got to keep practicing. Make yourself a jar of words, draw words out, and practice telling stories with just line. It's very valuable for your art making process. Okay, so one you're gonna try to communicate all of those different emotions on your mark making. On the next one, I want you to just put your pencil to the paper and see what comes out. You can do whatever you want. There's no right or wrong. Notice that I'm holding the pencil sort of backwards. And not really gripping down on it like you would if you were writing something down that needs to be legible. I like to vary my line pressure. Sometimes have dark lines, sometimes have light. Make it look a little different. Okay, that's very typical of one of my mark making sessions. Like I said, there's no right or wrong. I just want you to play around with it. After you do that, I want you to come back and I want you to pull out some gesso or some white paint. I'm going to use white paint just because it's right here to my side. And I'm going to take a paintbrush and I'm going to have a sprayer, a water sprayer. So one of the nice things about the Stabilo pencil and about doing it on gesso is that you can move it, right, with a little bit of water. So just by wetting the brush, I can dissolve some of those lines and change the way they look and feel. I can add puddles and let those puddles drip. So this is the piece where we did all of the emotions. I can spray. The idea here is to create different types of lines and be aware that sometimes the story you think you're telling isn't the story that you are telling, okay? And that's all down to lines. So I'm kind of getting rid of some of those confusion lines. I don't have any rhyme or reason. Putting some paint down, a little bit of white paint. Because paint, of course, is fluid, and so that will also dissolve that pencil. I'm not doing all of it. I'm just, keep sticking my paper in there. I'm just putting bits and bobs. I want some of the lines to be dissolved. I want some of the lines to be painted over. And yeah, that works for me. Perfect. Let's do it on this one. Kind of filling the gap in between those shapes. I don't know why I felt like it, but I did. Wet my brush. Dissolve some lines. Don't dissolve it all or it'll just be one big pile of black paint, right? It's kind of fun. So these are not paintings, these are mark making. They're not meant to be paintings. You're not trying to turn it into a painting. You're just messing around. Getting warmed up and getting a feel for what it feels like just to be free and make marks. I guess in a way we're playing with value, which is lights and darks. By adding white paint or white gesso, we're lightening some of the areas. By adding water, we're darkening some of the areas, just to make it a little interesting. Okay, so there are my pieces. I want you to set these aside and let them dry. You don't have to do just 2. If you want to do 50, you certainly can. You can, but minimum 2, maximum yes. Sound good? And later these will come back into play in our abstract painting. All right, have fun mark making.